Even as children, I always thought Alexarin was blessed with natural beauty. As a hybrid, she got all the best traits from each parent, her Eldrin mother and a Sylvan elf father. Just like her mother, she has bright green eyes and is willowy and lithe of frame. She often styles her dark hair into a braid or ponytail that makes the Eldrin seasonal color streaks look like natural highlights. And though most elves have cream-colored skin with different tints in their complexion, an Eladrin skin color changes with the current season, but she is also part Sylvan elf, and their racial copper and green undertone melds well, no matter the season. It creates a visual aesthetic with the seasonal colors of her complexion gradually fading like a natural camouflage. And despite her preference for dusty old dog-eared books, her facility with arcane and fey magic coupled with the signature quick heal and agile precision of Sylvan elves make her a deadly adversary. But I'd never tell her that, because she is afraid of physical confrontation with me, and I'd rather keep that advantage over her. Her preference for practical clothing devoid of inessential ornamentation, not even to highlight her beauty, is extremely exasperating and unacceptable for one who is expected to take the mantle of a court noble. As the heir and herald of the Weather Weaver, she should dress to command more respect, and I wish she was more like her mother in that regard. I despaired long ago of trying to convince her of the importance of being the best dressed person in the room. No amount of threats, pleas, or promises could convince her to change her style preference. She said it is a meaningless competition. She had no interest in winning. She's unusual for an unseelie, in that she doesn't try to frighten, intimidate, or repulse onlookers either. A pair of goggles with a movable magnifying lens over the right eye was pushed up on her forehead, and she slid them off her forehead and set them on the equipment table. She removed a full-length leather apron discolored by splashes of unknown chemicals. Underneath, I could see she wore a long-sleeve multicolored camise and dark blue trousers with pockets stitched along the sides, in front that tucked into her boots ankle length, and made of black ink-dyed hard leather clothes with dull metal fasteners. A thin sheet of metal plating was riveted over her toes to prevent them from being crushed in a mishap with heavy equipment or machines. No elaborate etched buttons or intricate embroidery for her. Yet the cut of her clothes was perfect. Her blouse, pants, and boots fit distinctively around the main contours of her body, but were loose enough as to not hinder or constrict her movement. I grudgingly admit to myself that she makes understatement look attractive. Colonel Solomar, what business brings you to Speaks today? She greeted me in a formal tone, but made no pretense of looking happy to see me. But that was not abnormal. As children, we quarreled more often than not, and she was prone to anxiety episodes, and had to be taught meditation techniques by her mother's majordomo, who, I was told, left the Sealy court shortly after Prince Solil was born. Good, I do not have to mince words. I'm requesting permission to use the Moonlight Grove to move some of my garrison for a scouting mission. I want to assess the possible threat to Sparrow posed by Maddox and Reslin's army, I replied. How many? A few. Be more specific about numbers and troop type, please, she said in a tone that contained a hint of challenge. You're smart enough to know that sort of information is kept confidential, Alexarin, and you know I'm word-bound to Storhagar Tagindi for Every, the Weather Weaver, who has requested that I provide her with details whenever Grand Marshal Solhamar or his vassals or senior subordinate officers, that would be you, Colonel Solhamar, use the Moonlight Grove for military purposes. I raised my left eyebrow at that statement. Formerly, she referred to me and my father by our military rank, but more notably was the fact that she referenced her mother by one of her formal court titles and not as her mom. Is she taking her responsibilities more seriously since our last encounter? I muse momentarily, but don't linger on the notion. Could you just overlook that detail for once? I sighed. Since it's you, I could, but also since it's you, I won't, she replied. What's that supposed to mean? I look at her in disbelief. Figure it out, she said tersely. I vaguely sensed her annoyance was not just because I may be inadvertently delaying her from a task, but I had other objectives to accomplish that entailed her being in a more genial mood. So I stopped to think about our last encounter. Probably a seasonal festival encounter where I could simply apologize for the exchange. And I remembered. No, it was about my nephew, which was indirectly tied to why I'm here. Are you still mad about the little moorcat? I inquired in a tone to hint I sought reconciliation. The all too familiar pounding in my eyes and ears started. I scoff at her dismissive reference to her scheme to kidnap her nephew, blame me, and have me sentenced to serve as a dryad in her heart grove, and petition my mother for guardianship of the Moonlight Grove after the drama from that subsided. Mad? No. I was saddened that you believed I would treat the safety of children, especially the child of a beloved friend, so frivolously. And knowing you think I would be too incompetent to track down and appropriately deal with those unskilled nitwits you hired was an insult to my profession. However, I expect nothing except your contempt for me and my skills in the art arcane. But to add injury to your insults, you sought to imprison me for your crime in that pathetic copse of trees you planted. I would exile myself to the nine hells before allowing your irrational compulsions to publicly humiliate me for every public venue, extend to embarrassing Hierophant Rowena Briarthorn Solimar in the process by allowing you to turn your repugnant cluster of oversized bushes into my public prison. What are you talking about? Akureyri looked at me wide-eyed. I know you plotted with your druid Tangsley in order to have me bound as a dryad in your heart grove. As the firstborn daughter of a Hierophant, you are obliged to do better than present that detritus as a real grove. Alexarin stated with the nicest air, and I knew immediately she would accept nothing less than a sincere apology. No apology I offered could be sincere. Everything she stated was true. While I intended her imprisonment would not take longer than a month, and I certainly didn't expect her to find out about it. I'm not sorry I made the attempt. I prayed inwardly to Voar, and she didn't inform my mother about the bizarre blight affecting my grove. It was a strange fungal rot coming from spores in the air and on the ground that couldn't be dug up or cleared away. No purification rites I know about would abate it. Tangsley was a druid from the Circle of Steam under my aegis who claimed he had seen it before, and said that the binding ritual for installing a dryad would dispel it. I don't know who told you that, but they certainly didn't know all the facts. I responded in an even tone. It was the only thing I could offer, short of an overt confession. And I clenched my hands into fist in anger and envisioned a growing bonfire in my mind to burn away my conscious thoughts before I slip into a rage. She didn't want her mother knowing about the condition of her grove. I contemplated digging deeper, but when I noticed she clenched her hands into fists, I reconsidered. I am not willing to risk letting her know I hear her mental activities. She nodded to herself and pushed her thoughts about the grove from her mind. So much for that attempt, and focused on her upcoming militaristic pursuits. Business first, personal matter second," she said to herself as I continued to listen to her thoughts, which started to sound like the crackle of burning wood. What she said about her troops was true. It was a small unit, temporarily commissioned, and included a squad of hippogriff riders, a squad of archers, a squad of infantry, a few scouts, and a few hand-selected spell artillerists. Akureyri's designation for spellcasters with a repertoire suited for doing large-scale damage in pitched battles primarily, and enhancing or protecting others as a tertiary skill. 23 individual troops, Akureyri admitted. "It's a scouting mission ordered by Grand Marshal Solamar and a diplomatic mission on my orders. Some of the platoon members have orders to contact nearby towns and offer mercenary services, whether or not Sparrow is interested." I nod once to confirm and reach up to rub my eyes with my thumb and index finger. "When and how are they returning?" "The platoon is not expected to return in mass. We, that is I, have couriers and runners placed for coordinated delivery of reports. They will return as need dictates." I kept my mouth shut since I am only vaguely privy to the machinations of Sealy Court nobility, and because I prefer to maintain plausible deniability of whatever her current convoluted scheme was. Before I responded to grant her the authorization she desired, I rubbed my eyes with my thumb and index finger once again as my headache started to creep behind my eyes. "You have consent to use the Moonlight Grove under the conditions you outline with the following 2 additions. 1. You will personally present yourself and display proper homage to the current Sealy and unsealy rulers that consider Speece and the Moonlight Grove their domain. 2. While in Speece, you and those under your command will respect and observe the precepts of hospitality. Failure to do so will subject you and those under your command under an immediate ban of access to the Moonlight Grove and its properties and full prohibitions of entry and egress of our territory until such time that I or the current active ruler rescinds it." The presentation request was not unusual in and of itself, but as the scion of a highborn noble or a military officer on a time-sensitive assignment, she could ignore that custom, and she often did. The current Sealy Fate leader that replaced Bruticus after he was promoted to a magisterial post in Grillith, better suited his ambitions, was a clergyman named Innovic. He is a connoisseur of alcoholic drinks and spends most of his time brewing or distilling spirits and sewing fabrics. He will barter with anyone or anything, and by anyone or anything, I include denizens of the lower planes that can provide him with the substances to produce alcohol or fabrics. On a personal note, I preferred Bruticus to him. Bruticus was actually concerned about the welfare of all the Fae who lived in Speece, and, although he would deny it, even the non-Fae residents. Innovic's disregard for such matters, including other fairies, was actually disconcerting in light of the fact that he is chosen on the basis of being best suited to look out for their interests. But who am I to judge? Despite some subtle and not so subtle hints, I repeatedly refused to claim leadership of both Fae and mortals here. I serve best by having the ability to act independently and travel to the far reaches of Everin at a moment's notice, not chained by responsibility to the area lest I miss a council meeting or an adjudication day for the residents or the never-ending meetings and parties I would be required to attend like my mother, fairy godparents, and some of my friends must do on a regular basis. After a few moments, I realized that I didn't catch Akureyri's response, so once more I read her thoughts. She agreed to present herself to Innovic and even knew his name. She inquired on suggestions for a suitable gift. My mind-reading spell was going to end soon, and I mulled over whether or not I wanted to recast it or just bring our dialogue to a close. and hopefully my headache will depart with her. I was curious about the matter of her growth, but the pounding in my ears had moved behind my eyes and to the back of my neck, amplifying my general antipathy of her proximity at the moment. An abrupt gasp for air indicated the beginning of my breathing spasms. They are 7 hiccups complete with the brief stabbing pain in my chest, followed by my sensation of bile building up in the back of my mouth. Great timing, I think to myself as my frustration rises. Soon they would disrupt my speaking cadence, and I could forget about casting anything that required more than a few syllables of verbal declaration. I could sense Alexarin's anxiety rising. The taste was too mild to be angry normally, but it had a trace of pepper. Vexation possibly laced with the bland, almondy taste of nascent fear. "You look ill. Do you need anything?" I asked, trying to convey concern. "It's nothing," she replied in a non-committal tone. As for traditional gifts, Inuvik likes to make his own libations and is a weaver. "Are you breathing too much of those odd chemicals and herb mixtures you like to play with?" I asked, but she didn't respond. Instead, she reached into her pocket for a tiny vial and placed a few drops of the contents on her tongue. It smelled like wintergreen oil. "You should remove the roof over your lab," I suggested. "What about my equipment and concoctions when it rains or snows?" "You can control the weather like on Devo, right? Just make it not rain here." I looked around once more. "You grossly overstate my capabilities, or understate hers by comparing us so casually." She laughed until another breath spasm occurred. "I happen to like the rain." Alexarin took a deep breath. "And snow. And it would be selfish to disrupt the weather here. Most of species' livelihood is agricultural." "Stand still a moment, Alexarin." I stepped closer and pulled off my leather riding gloves and reached towards her face to touch her forehead. "Don't." She held up her hand in a gesture to stop and took a deliberate step backwards. "Touch me." "It won't hurt." She paused nonetheless. Even if I lunged, she was waiting to react. "You rubbed my face in dirt, made me lick your boots, broke my wrist, bloodied my nose, cracked 3 ribs, and punctured." She took a deep breath. "Both lungs." She paused to wait for the next breathing spasm to finish before she continued. "Each time was deliberate, so I'll thank you to keep your hands to yourself, Colonel." It was not an inaccurate declaration, but I think it was rather unfair. I was a bully at times and honestly regret some of the things I had said and done to her and my brother both when we were children, but she gave every bit as good as she got. Her invectives and head curses would hurt for hours or days after an altercation. She and my brother both apprenticed with Aunt Viveferi to learn arcane magic when we were little. And as I got older, one by one we separated. I was a squire under my father, Morcat pledged to the Druidic mysteries with my mother, and Alexarin tried to find a professional she liked, eventually settling into the wizard tradition of elven blade song. I hoped that when she returned from the cutting edge, the 3 of us would adventure together for a few years, as our parents had done, and we had talked about doing someday, but she was gone. For the next 25 years, I only saw her during the winter solstices. Eventually, Aunt Viveferi requested her to watch over the crossways at Spice, and I saw her more regularly at court functions and the other more pleasant holidays, but by then we both had other associations to cultivate. Mine were exclusively invested in the Sealy court, and they were weary of alienating the Weather Weaver or her daughter, even if she was non-aligned. The night of my celebration of being newly knighted as an oathsworn of the Oak was the night I found out she had, at some point prior, pledged to the Unseelie court. I remembered feeling a nice numbness and repulsion at her proximity. The innate senses of Oaknights developed to ascertain a phase court affiliation. I was furious at her for not telling me, and for accepting an invitation meant for those of Seelie alignment, or at least those of no formal allegiance. When I confronted her about it, she told me she didn't care about court affiliation. She had come to celebrate the knighthood of someone she had known all her life. At that moment I saw red. She didn't care. I strove all my life to become worthy of the Order of Oak and the antithesis of the Unseelie court. Meanwhile, she left me behind to travel around Everin as we had originally planned, and was now waltzing back over 30 years later like no time had passed. At that moment, I lost control of my anger, punched her in the face and started to pummel her. I had violated the precepts of hospitality in assaulting her and got a lesson from the School of Hard Knocks. Elven Bladesong was not an effete wizard attempt of an intimidation bluff, but a vicious combat style combining some of the nastiest curses and damage meant to inflict harm with savage weapon strikes designed to cripple. I did beat her unconscious, but she had severed my thumb and index finger using my own sword against me, and cursed me blind and deaf for a month. While our subsequent interactions never again reached that level of violence, future conversations were usually polarized. Despite both our parents' advice that I should apologize and make amends with her, I refused. Apologizing is admitting weakness, and my innate weird surges to physically invigorate me whenever we have a confrontation, and the experience is intoxicating. I extended my right hand, palm out, with my fingers spread apart in the traditional gesture to signify my spoken word is considered an oath. Don't be churlish. I promise I won't harm you, stated sincerely. Alexarin extended her left hand towards me for a handshake, indicating the only level of physical contact she would permit. I frowned but accepted her concession and clasped her hand as I directed the fire of my life force to surge into her cold hand and rejuvenate her. And after a few seconds I placed my left hand over the back of hers and smiled as I placed the poison ward on her, which would prevent poisons from taking effect or causing her to violently expel most toxins, venoms, or poisonous injections or inhalations if they were already in her body, and waited for any sort of reaction in case her condition proved to be more severe than she suspected. The taste of charcoal, grit, and bitter root filled my mouth, and I knew from prior experience that Akureyri invoked magic to dispel poisons and stared through me for several moments. I think she was mildly disappointed when I did not start vomiting, but to her credit, my headache did subside. Thank you. I injected a measure of cheerfulness into my tone and conveyed sincere gratitude. Akureyri nodded wordlessly, and after a short pause, she started her next topic. I began to investigate into Garu's disappearance. You know Garu is the unicorn who lives north of here. Akureyri elaborated when I didn't comment. Yes, Colonel, I am familiar with Garu by reputation, I replied calmly, and I heard rumors she disappeared with her foal. Garu was a unicorn who lived near the gnomish settlement of Perilu. I had never encountered her, but I also didn't usually travel there. Nor are unicorns known for being socialites. She typically made her presence known by leaving deep footprints to collect water, which, when drunk, cure a variety of injuries. Local history says she often helps lost children or injured lone travelers in the area. What have you heard? Akureyri demanded abruptly. Quite a few things. Some of them are fanciful, but most are rather lurid. I was reluctant to discuss the topic. At best, it's idle gossip. At worst, it's disrespectfully gruesome. She was murdered, Alexarin, Akureyri informed me in no uncertain terms. That is the copper-piece version of the bard tale being told right now. I frown. Do you intend to do anything about it? She inquired. I don't know if there is anything to do. She disappeared, as did her child. For all I know, she decided to take her child to Eliza or Mount Celestia or the Wildlands to raise. You're the witch guardian of space and the defender of the Moonlight Grove. This area is under your protection. Perilu is not part of space and is Gru's responsibility, not mine. Have you visited Childrick Valley within the past season? Akureyri inquired, seeming to change the subject. Not since I surveyed the wildfire arson damage a few years ago. It's remote and a few days away on foot from any usable roads or trails unless I apparate. Why do you ask? A defilement ritual of some sort was performed there by shadow elves. The valley is dying, Akureyri informed me. I'm home, Mr. Raven called to announce his arrival as he entered through his perch door and made a spiral descent into the room to land on my shoulder. Welcome, I replied and reached into his treat pouch and handed him a chunk of rye bread, and turned my attention back to Akureyri, but she was starting to fear my familiar.